All right, well, welcome back and welcome to our final property management lesson. You can see this lesson is going to focus on change of command inventories and the process that you would go through as the incoming commander. So what I recognize is most, if not all of you, have been through at least one change of command inventory. I think you've been through a change of command inventory maybe as a platoon leader, some of you both as a platoon leader and as a company XO. And my point is this. Because you have been exposed, I think you've afforded yourself the opportunity to really give thought to what your inventory would look like as the incoming commander. So I created this section really trying to bring certain things to light, really speaking the process and the things that you would want to be mindful of as we go forward. So you can see here our references. We're looking at AR 710-2. We're also looking at DAPM 710-2-1, specifically Chapter 9-3, and that's really the section that guides you through the specific things that you would do during this process. And then if you're in the National Guard or Reserve, 9-4 coming out of the DAPM is the guide that you would use when completing your inventory. So I start with key points. 30 days would be allotted to conduct the joint inventory, and then it goes on to say if the inventory cannot be completed in the allotted time, then you're basically allotted or afforded, should I say, the opportunity to submit a request for extension to your next higher commander. AR 710-2 states that those extension requests are 15 days in duration, and again, each one would have to be approved by the next higher commander. The last thing under key points is there is a provision for those of you in the National Guard or Reserve whereby you don't have to physically inventory all of your unit's equipment. You only have to physically inventory those items that have yet to be further hand receipted. So as we move on here, things that I want you to consider, and my apologies for not saying this sooner, we're on page number 60 in your handout. Things to consider. So now you're having that initial meeting with the outgoing commander, and I want you to give thought to what I have documented here. First of all, is there policy in place that requires pre-change of command inventories to be conducted? I personally think it's a must as a part of a rehearsal. I think it affords the outgoing commander the opportunity to verify one last time that they do indeed have positive control over all of their equipment. In addition to, it affords that commander the opportunity to go back and correct any discrepancies that may have been discovered. So if the answer is yes, then you and I would think that this inventory that you're getting ready to go through would be well executed by virtue of the fact that there was a pre-inventory and all discrepancies discovered have indeed been corrected. Look at number 2, are platoon leaders serving as sub-hand receipt holders? So I think I shared with you in a previous lesson, I'm an advocate of lieutenants signing for their platoon's equipment, but with all due respect, I understand that that's the commander's decision. Now, if you're of the mindset, like myself, that the platoon leader should sign and they're not currently a part of the process, then my recommendation to you is to share that with the outgoing commander and request that the platoon leaders be pulled into the process as a part of your change of command inventory, meaning they can inventory while you're inventorying. So you got to figure out what that looks like going forward. Number 3, is there a policy in place that requires the further sub-hand receipting of property within that platoon or section? Once again, during a previous lesson, we talked about the flow of accountability that exists or should exist between the commander, the supervisor, and the end user. Number 4, counseling. I'm a huge advocate of two things. One, education. Second to that, counseling. And I have indeed provided you with an example of what that counseling would look like via SharePoint. Number 5, how often are cyclic inventories conducted? You can best believe from an active duty perspective that's going to happen monthly. National Guard and perspective, that's probably going to happen quarterly. How often are sub-hand receipts updated? Again, all you're trying to do is to gather information. Number 7, so now it's critical. Is there a publication on hand for every piece of equipment listed on a commander's primary hand receipt? You and I would think that we would have a technical manual or a supply catalog available for all of the unit's equipment. But you got to make that verification. The second sentence I think is critical. What about those items identified as non-standard or commercial off the shelf? And I think this is where people struggle as they're trying to complete an inventory. We have lots of commercially based items in our formation, but now it's a matter of, do we have the appropriate reference that in turn shows us what the item is, better yet, shows the components associated with that equipment. Number 8, also critical, is there a bill of materials for all equipment listed on the commander's primary hand receipt? So, previous lesson, we looked at BOM directives, we looked at the process by which those bill of materials are managed. So I think that lesson in and of itself has kind of set an expectation for you. Hey, what about the manual DA Form 2062 in cases where there is no bill of materials in GCSS Army? Now, mind you, I also talked about the capability that your supply folks have when there is no bill of materials in GCSS Army. If you remember, they have the ability to go into a transaction code called ZBOM add, and they could create what's called an operational support item bill of materials. So again, I think it's critical that you put all of this into perspective. On page 61, look at number 9. Property book work orders. Have they been created to account for all component shortages? Hey, what about that material issue slip? A reminder, the Army G4, that newsletter, March 2019, stated that the material issue slip would replace the legacy DA Form 2062 when used as a shortage annex. Number 10, our DA Form 2062 shortage annex is available for all equipment with no BOM in GCSS Army. Again, we've learned this based on literature that I've made available to you. Number 11, what about policy letters that specifically address property accountability and command supply discipline? And then for what it's worth, number 12, really just looking at the standard operating procedures for that supply room and understanding how they function. So as I'm creating this section of the handout, I felt compelled to take the inventory process and to divide it amongst 3 different phases. And you can see here we're starting with the pre-inventory phase. Now, I said earlier that DAPAM 710-2-1, specifically 9-3, would be the guide that you would utilize during your initial inventory. However, 9-3 divided into 2 sections. So 9-3 Alpha really speaks the responsibility of the outgoing commander, and then 9-3 Bravo would speak the responsibility that you would have during the inventory process. So everything from check-in with the next higher commander for instructions, receiving the brief from the PBO, getting documentation, to record the result of your inventory. Again, things that are happening in 9-3 Alpha. So the third bullet is critical, and I'm adding outgoing commander just to make sure I'm addressing the right person. But now the outgoing commander would make sure that all hand or sub-hand receipts and annexes with changed documents are updated. And the key word is updated. So you and I would think that if there was indeed a pre-change of command inventory that was conducted, then justifiably so, all documentation has been updated as well. And I will tell you, again, based on my experience, when this is true, then generally speaking, the inventory is well executed. There's really no issues that you have, nor are there any issues against the outgoing commander. The next bullet, reviewing DAPM 25-30 to ensure that we have the appropriate reference material, understanding how to go out and gain access to a technical manual or how to gain access to a supply catalog. All right, so if you look at the next bullet, it talks about the inventory schedule. Generally speaking, that inventory schedule is created by the outgoing commander. I would hope that you're afforded the opportunity to provide input to that schedule. So for me personally, I would want to inventory the most difficult piece of equipment first. And the reason why I say that and have always advocated that is because I realize that that's where your motivation and your enthusiasm is going to be at its highest point. I've been through inventories where people want to do the easy stuff first. In my case, I think that would be misleading. Hey, show me the hard stuff, and then I understand that the pain is going to lessen from that point on. Look at the notation. Please recognize, if you don't already recognize, that there's really, the DAPM doesn't talk specifically regarding methods. Hey, do we do the inventory by platoon or section, or do we do the inventory by like item? Now, if I scroll down a little bit here, you can see that I'm an advocate of doing the inventory by platoon or section. Why? Because to me, you can get all of that platoon or section equipment inventoried throughout, day, 3 days, 4 days, etc., and then now you're done. I think that makes it easier on you as the incoming commander. It definitely makes it easier on that platoon or section rather than, the onesies and twosies throughout a, let's say, 30-day period. So the naysayer is going to say, well, wait a minute, if you do that, now you stand the risk of property moving around during the inventory. So what I submit to you is this. If you understand what it means to be last, meaning you're going to inventory a piece of equipment, the operator's going to sign first, the section sergeant's going to sign second. If you understand what that looks like and how you apply that methodology, then you don't have to worry about things moving around during the inventory. All right, the next bullet really speaks to kind of the expectation with the supply sergeant and the documentation that they should provide to you. I say 1 or 2 days prior. I think that affords you the opportunity in your own quiet time to look at what it is that you're getting ready to inventory, especially if it's a piece of equipment that you're not familiar with. I think you have to do your own rehearsal before you show up on the scene to conduct a proper inventory. In addition to the bullets just really referencing the fact that, hey, you would want to verify and determine whether or not the bill of materials in this case is consistent with the technical manual or the supply catalog. We talked about when there are inconsistencies, the Army says, hey, that's those inconsistencies, clarification would be sought through the help desk ticket process. All right, so now we're in the inventory phase. So I created these golden rules, and if I was afforded the opportunity to teach you during your basic course, the same golden rules applied then as they do now. Hey, number 1, I stand committed to not signing for a piece of equipment that I did not physically inventory. I think easily that rule makes sense. However, you have to give thought to exceptions. Hey, you're inventorying a company's worth of property. Oh, by the way, the unit just redeployed and not everything has returned back to home station. What does the inventory look like at that point in time? hey, everything's back at home station, but you have one piece of equipment that's geographically separated from your location. What does the inventory look like at that point in time? Hey, you're going to embrace technology. Are you going to FaceTime? Are you going to do all of these things as a way of establishing positive control? So in the end, you have to do it in a way that's pleasing and satisfactory to you, because ultimately this is your finances that are on the line, and naturally you would want to do everything within your power to protect those finances. Number two here, I'll always be the last person assigned. I'll reiterate that point in just a second here so you know exactly what that looks like. If you look at page number 62, the note says, during your change of command inventory, I highly encourage you to take lots of photos. I can't emphasize how important it is that you do that. So just take out your phone. Most of us have smartphones, and just take a picture of the major end item, or maybe if you have concerns over a piece of equipment, that I think you take pictures of a specific component, etc., because now maybe you're having to engage in conversation with your leadership, or maybe with the property book officer, because you have some concerns. All right, so the steps that follow, I'm pulling from 9-3 Bravo out of the DAPM. However, anything that you see in bold is what I've added, and I've added only for simplicity's sake. So as you're going through the inventory, you understand what document you're utilizing at that point in time. Look at number one. So using the sub-hand receipt, again, I'm trying to guide you through the process, and I think this is critical that I do so if you're doing this inventory for the very first time. Hey, check all items to make sure the item and their description on the unit property book or hand receipt match. Very simply, you're going to make a list of differences. Be timely in reporting those differences to your higher headquarters. Maybe you're going to communicate those differences with the S4, maybe the battalion XO. I would definitely be timely in reporting those differences back to your property book officer so they can give you specific guidance as to how you should proceed. Number two, make a visual check of the condition of the property. Make a list of any damaged equipment. Hey, I'm going to go one further and say take a picture, advertise it, let people understand what it is that you just discovered. Hey, what about the 5988 Echo? Personally, I think you should have a copy of all 5988s as proof that that equipment is in a fully mission-capable state, or should I say, you would want to have copies for the purpose of knowing the state of that equipment at the point by which you inventoried that item. Number three, using the sub-hand receipt, hey, you're going to count all of the items listed on that hand receipt. Make a list of any overages or shortages. Hey, the overages, now we throw out that acronym FOI, found on installation. And that means you have to be willing, as the incoming commander, you got to look everywhere. You got to go into storage areas. You got to determine whether or not people are stockpiling, if you will. By doing so, by going into those areas, ultimately, I think you're making a determination as to whether or not the state of accountability is where it needs to be within that organization. Number four, now you're using the component hand receipt. You're going to check the end item for completeness. Again, we already talked about publications and having access to the technical manual or supply catalog. Now, last sentence in number four, shortage annexes. So this is where now you have to shift it up a little bit and go, okay, wait a minute. There's a bill of materials in GCSS Army. I should have the material issue slip. Hey, there is no bill of materials in GCSS Army. I should now have the shortage annex, and really understanding that in your mind. And I'm basically alluding to that in the reminder. All right, moving on to number five, really speaks to serial numbers. I will tell you personally that serial number is either right or that serial number is wrong. Understand that every character within the confines of that serial number matches. So if you look at the hand receipt and it says Alpha Dash Tango, but you look at the data plate for that vehicle and it says Alpha Tango, then naturally you have a serial number discrepancy. I would definitely take pictures of all of the data plates so you can see the major assembly as it's defined. You can clearly see the serial number, because even though we may have conducted, or they may have conducted, a pre-change of command inventory, doesn't mean you're not going to find serial number discrepancies, because I think it's kind of bound to happen. All right, so now what I want you to do is I want you to look at number 6, relevant to items that are in maintenance. So understand you should have a copy of the maintenance request. Hey, you should go to the maintenance facility. If for some reason that equipment is geographically separated from your location, then I would definitely recommend you reach out to them to make a determination as to whether or not they have that equipment. So proceed however it is that you need to proceed, but please make that verification. All right, number 7, once again for the second time, talking about damaged equipment. Now, step number 2 is really ensuring that everything that you inventoried, that the accountability for that equipment is reestablished. So I will tell you, in a perfect world, when you enter into the organization as the incoming commander, hey, there should be a distinct flow for all of that property. Again, I advocate platoon leader to platoon sergeant to section sergeant, all the way down to the end user. So what follows in the handout is with the expectation that that flow is already in place, because if it is, then this portion here is going to be easily executed. Now, there's a note here that says, hey, the person issuing the property is responsible for the preparation of that hand receipt. So if you look at the very first one, so scenario, you come into the motor pool and you're getting ready to inventory a vehicle. Hey, all personnel who are responsible for that equipment, they're standing by. You're recording like they're recording to make sure that there are not any losses. And now the inventory is done. So now you take a step back and you physically witness the section sergeant reissuing the property back to the operator. Hey, that's going to happen first. Hey, understand that happened prior to your arrival, but now based on your inventory, we're re-energizing, the accountability for that equipment. So again, the operator is going to sign first. Hey, let's imagine that all of the equipment in that section has now been inventoried. Hey, once again, you're taking a step back, and now you're witnessing the platoon sergeant reissuing all of that property back to the section sergeant. So the operator is going to be first, the section sergeant's going to be second. Hey, now all of the platoon's equipment has been inventoried. Once again, you're taking a step back, and now you're witnessing the platoon leader reissuing all of that equipment to the platoon sergeant. So once again, operator first, section sergeant second, platoon sergeant third. Okay, so now it's your turn. So now you're going to issue all of that equipment to the platoon leader. Hey, the note says the supply sergeant is going to make documentation available so you can complete that task. And then finally, you're going to sign. And you're going to be the last person to sign. So I would hope that when you meet your property book officers, they're advocating this methodology. I want you to be that commander, that incoming commander, who now goes to the PBO to say, hey, chief, everything's been physically inventoried. All discrepancies have been corrected. Oh, by the way, property accountability has been reestablished. Now I'm truly ready to sign. So beyond the initial signing, hey, any update that transpires thereafter, you still want to be last. So that's where you incorporate battle rhythms to make sure that all of your subordinates sign for all of that equipment before you re-sign with the PBO. So some of you, I think, have a working knowledge of this. Others of you may interpret this to be foreign. But I say again, you have to do this in a way that ultimately protects you. And that's really what it comes down to. All right, so on the top of page number 63, it talks about situations when people die or depart the organization without transferring responsibility for the property and the role that that commander would assume. I've been through that scenario on 2 separate occasions as a property book officer, and in essence what happens is the company XO generally acts on the outgoing commander's behalf. Now, for those of you in the National Guard or Reserve, if you're watching this video, I've already mentioned what's coming out of AR 710-2, whereby you only have to inventory those items that have not been further sub-hand receipted. Hey, take a look at what I prepared here. I think this does a really nice job in ultimately protecting your own financial interest. All right, so now as part of the post-inventory, step number 1, you have the responsibility to make sure that all of those discrepancies have been reconciled with the PBO. Step number 2 really is taking you into reports in GCSS Army. So what I recognize is this: you're not going to have access to GCSS Army as the incoming commander. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to sit alongside someone who does. That could be your XO, that would be your supply sergeant, maybe it would be both of them. So now you're like, okay, show me the commander's SLOC. Hey, I want to verify that there's no property that's in a transitional state. Hey, provide me with a copy of the primary hand receipt in the form of an asset visibility report. I showed you how to do that in a previous lesson. Hey, provide me with a copy of all of the open property book work orders. Again, previous lesson showed you how we would go into a specific transaction code for the purpose of producing that report. And finally, I want to have the dollar value associated with all component shortages. I think that's absolutely critical that you establish that start point going forward. Step number 3, there's a second verification, if you will, that all of the hand receipts have been updated prior to signing the primary hand receipt with the PBO. I don't see a whole lot of step number 4, but I'm a huge advocate of step number 4. I think you should communicate with your S4s, and I think you should ask them to come into that supply room for the purpose of auditing documentation. Once again, this is something that's going to put your mind at ease. How helpful is it? How beneficial is it if the S4 can come in and say, hey, look, sir, ma'am, all of your stuff is accounted for, documentation lines up accordingly, your start point is where you and I would want your start point to be. Step number 5, change of command inventory packets. It's not a regulatory requirement, it's locally driven. So not all packets look the same. Again, it's locally driven, but you'll have the responsibility to produce that packet as well. Hey, your after action memorandum should be signed by yourself as the incoming commander, but understand should be endorsed by many people. And I'm talking about the outgoing commander, I'm talking about the property book officer, I'm talking about the battalion commander, I'm talking potentially the brigade commander. So now, in the end, you have a collective group of people that have certified that you've done everything that you have been directed to do. And again, your start point is solid. Now, 9-4, moving on. If you're watching the video again and you're in the National Guard or Reserve, here are the steps that you would go through when completing your inventory. So as I bring this lesson to a close, I just want to take a moment here and look at this supply sergeant initial counseling. So, I took some time to really document the basic things that your supply sergeant should be doing as it relates to property accountability. At some point, I want you to go back and I want you to look at what I prepared and figure out whether or not this becomes a usable document for you. Everything from number 1, making sure that all the property is sub-hand receipted accordingly, the process by which number 2, stuff is coming into the organization and how that property is issued, to the sub-hand receipt holder in a timely manner. Look at number 3. All sub-hand receipts will be updated and re-signed prior to the commander signing the primary hand receipt with the PBO. There we go again, that last mentality. They sign first, you sign last. Number 4 really speaks to the flow of accountability and how the supply sergeant can assist in that process. Number 6, cyclic inventories. Your supply sergeant should be accompanying you during the inventory of that equipment. Number 7, talking about publications. Hey, I put a little blurb in here. In addition, you will create a photo album. You know, again, we have the ability through the use of our smartphones. Why not? Hey, how beneficial is it to have the technical manual, the supply catalog, and a picture of that equipment in the form of a photo album? Again, all of these capabilities exist, but I'm not really sure that people are capitalizing on them. Number 8, bill of materials. Again, previous lesson, really understanding the process. Help desk tickets that was submitted. If there were help desk tickets or are help desk tickets that are submitted, I think you should retain copies of those as a commander. Talks about, toward the bottom of page 64, that operational support item bill of materials when there's not a bomb pre-existing in GCSS Army. Number 9, top of page 65, the work order process. And now how the supply sergeant is coming back and providing you with the necessary reports, and you can see the 4 bullets there. Number 10 really speaks to the movement of equipment. You're going to have stuff come into the organization. Naturally, you're going to have stuff leave the organization, and making sure that all of those suspense dates are met. Number 11, really the communication between supply sergeant, company XO, and yourself. And then number 12, I have OCD tendencies, so I have my own interpretation of what right looks like. But again, you're the commander, so you have to do it in a way that's pleasing to you. Down at the bottom here, just additional resources that you have access to. And finally, my point of contact information. And I did indeed provide that point of contact information to you initially during the, or not during, but on the module syllabus. So this has been an absolute pleasure. Hopefully this hasn't been hard for you doing things in a virtual or DL environment. I would hope during all of these lessons I've heightened your awareness. Hey, if anything, what's really important to me is the reach back capability. And I spent a lot of time on the phone with captains. I spent a lot of time responding to emails, and I would hope that I've impacted you enough whereby you're going to take me up on that offer. Very simply, if there's anything that I can do for you, I would really hope that you pick up the phone or send me an email so I can help you with that situation. So outside of that, this concludes our time together. You guys take care of yourself. And again, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.